This is Marvin Eloquent, and you're listening in to the Dynasty Hotseat.
Yes. Hello and welcome back to the Dynasty Hot Seat, the only Dynasty show that is a certified inferno. Today, hey, we're back. It's been a minute. I've been away. I've been in Paris. I've been chilling, looking at the Eiffel Tower. It's been great fun, but we're back with a huge, amazing guest. Returning back onto the show, Marvin Eloquent is back, ladies and gentlemen. Marvin, great to see you again. How are you doing?
Really good to see you again, Mags. I'm kind of jealous. Paris sounds awesome. I can't say I've taken a trip like that anytime recently, but it's good to have you back here. I'm glad to be here and to talk some rookies with you.
Yeah, I'm certainly a few pounds heavier. I'm like, it's just the food is off the charts over there. It's just like steak and wine and anything you can imagine. I had snails for the first time. They're absolutely delicious, but they were just like covered in butter and garlic. So I think it could have been it could have been cardboard in the shell.
Anything covered in butter will taste good, right?
yeah. So I'm back now in the hot seat mothership, and we're ready to chat some 2023 rookies. But Marvin, can you believe I was studying a little bit actually at the airport, like of people listening to the show, how many people subscribe? Do you know that only like 50% of people are subscribed to the show right now who are listening like right now? So
come on, subscribe. What are you guys doing?
Come on, guys. What are you doing? Hit that little button so you don't miss out on great content from Marvin and from other great guests. So with that out of the way, Marvin, we're going to dive into our first segment. It's some hints and tips for Dynasty players. You got one sort of big hint that we're going to talk about, and then some other things might be littered into the mock draft later on. So what have you got for us?
Yeah, I think it's perfect time to think about rookies and how we want to evaluate them, especially with, as we're recording this, just literally days away from the NFL draft. And so one tip I have for all Dynasty players, anyone that wants to dive into like rookie evaluation, is that they're evaluating rookies is not a one metric process. There isn't one metric that will tell you the full story. There's so many different things that you can factor in to get yourself a holistic picture of a player. And so when you're limiting yourself to only one metric or one view, it won't give you the best picture of what a rookie could be in the NFL. So that's why factor in as much as you can, right? There's so many resources out there. Draft capital is obviously the strongest one. We'll see that here in a couple of days. That's the strongest metric that we have, but then you can factor in production, you can factor in efficiency, athletic measurables. There are people out there that, create film grades that you can use. Lance Zierlein, ESPN has some of theirs that goes back to 2010. You can use a lot of that to evaluate some of these rookies and see how historically some of the rookies have done, to then project out some of these new ones coming in. And so, there isn't a metric that they'll tell you everything, but there's so many different pieces that you can put together to give you the best, picture of which rookies could succeed in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so damn hard as well, because there are so many like hidden metrics as well that you don't see, like things that are going on in their personal lives. How do they interview? I mean, what kind of rapport do they have in the locker room? Like, even like you can't predict like their playing projection, like how much are these players going to develop? How many of them have, peaked in high school, right? Like the old saying is, like, you don't know what is going to happen. So yeah, even if you get everything right on your checklist, sometimes you just miss and sometimes you just hit as well.
For sure.
It's like that. So we're going to see how many hits you're going to get here, Marvin, because we're going to pull up the mock draft here. We got 2 rounds. We're going to go through. Marvin, you're going to take every single pick. We're going to chat about each player. Some players we'll talk about for a while. Other players, we might not need to chat about so much because people kind of know that Bijan Robinson's the man, right? So we might skip over him for a little bit, but we'll see who kind of comes up and who you want to talk about. It's kind of up to you. So we'll start off. I did mention Bijan Robinson. Is he your 101 like everybody else?
Yes, he is. I think it's not a secret out there anymore that most people would take Bijan Robinson. So I won't, go into deep detail with him, but he's first-round running back, checks all the boxes you look for, athletic, produced in college at a high level every single year. And so honestly, he, to me, is like in that borderline 99th, 98th percentile prospect, running back prospect in my evaluation. And so he, to me, is the closest thing to a sure thing in this draft right now. So 101 for sure.
So the big thing I've been pondering about this 101 and Bijan Robinson is, if sort of hypothetically you were offered the 2024 101 for this 101,
ooh,
what would you be doing in that case?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I would probably do is evaluate my team first. If I am very close to contending, if I'm like on the cusp, like let's say, you were the 9th seed or 10th seed and you happen to acquire the 101, acquiring Bijan Robinson could be that difference maker for your team. And so in that sense, I would try to hold on that as much as possible. But let's say you are 2-3 years away. You're just starting to rebuild. You have the 101. The 101 next year, it's hard to predict who, first of all, like in the Dynasty landscape, which teams will be last, right? That's so tough. But let's say for a fact this team's terrible, you're going to get their pick. There are some good players coming in next year. I mean, Caleb Williams is the quarterback that really stands out that I think could be the next generational. I mean, I don't like to use that word because that gets thrown out a lot, but he's going to be a good prospect. And so if you can get that potential 101 next year and then get yourself, you move down, I don't know, to the 1 or even the 2-1, I think that's worth it because you'll still get a good prospect in this class, but then you'll secure yourself a potentially elite prospect in next year's class. So it's really team dependent, but I think that's something I'd entertain if you are a year or two away from truly contending.
Yeah, absolutely. I just thought it was an interesting little discussion, but kind of no real discussion about Bijan being 101 in this class. So so who's coming in at 102? I always like to say sort of the real draft kind of starts here, right? So who's coming in at 102?
Yeah, so these next two guys, I can kind of pair it up with the 2 and the 3 here, but it's the 2 quarterbacks, and to me they're the 1A and 1B, and that's Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. I would take Bryce Young here just because I think he is a little safer in that we know where he's going to be. He's going to be the first overall pick. That's what it very, very strongly sounds like right now. And when you think about his landing spot, I mean, he has a solid team around him. It's not as terrible as we think. He has Adam Thielen, who's been very solid over the years. Miles Sanders, DJ Chark, Terrace Marshall, Hayden Hurst. I mean, these aren't terrible players. You think about like a Houston landing spot. I think there are more holes on that team than there are with Carolina. And so when you look at Bryce as a prospect, I mean, he's an 87th percentile adjusted yards per attempt passer coming out of college over the last decade of prospects. Very good there. 71st percentile completion rate. A lot of good things in his game. And with the draft capital there, I think he is someone who you'd feel confident in taking at the 102. Now, Stroud is interesting because to me, he checks so many boxes. In some ways, he's a better, analytically, he's a better prospect than Young is. No matter what metric you look at, if you try to adjust it by like conference strength, if you adjust it by team strength and team, context, he's in that like 90th percentile in so many metrics. And so that to me is why Stroud, in some ways, I'd be fine taking him as the QB1. But let's say you're sitting there at the 103, I'd be just as happy getting Stroud as I would be with getting Young at the 102.
Yeah, I think for this one, it's almost for me, it's who does go to the Panthers out of those two. I think I'll just take that. I'll just take that
for
guy.
Sure.
If it's Stroud, I'll take Stroud. If it's Young, I'll take Young, because Texans have been a bit of a dumpster fire for a while, and there's nobody really to throw to. Yeah, I'll just take the better landing spot out of those two. But yeah, you're right. It's 1A, 1B, kind of. It's a bit of a coin flip. So who's coming in then at pick number 4 after those two?
Okay, so here's where it gets a little spicy, I think. I don't know if this is as I know, we're Dynasty hot seat, right? We got to bring the heat here. And so I think a lot of people would gravitate towards another quarterback here, but I actually would take Jahmyr Gibbs. Nice. I don't know if that's necessarily a hot take, but to me, he is a prospect even with his weight concerns. And I mean, 200 pounds feels like an arbitrary threshold anyways. Like just because he missed it by a pound doesn't mean he can't be good. But when you look at the prospects that have succeeded that were somewhat lighter in frame, those are guys that have been very involved as a receiver. And Gibbs averaged 17% of his team's receiving yards in his career. And when you think about the average of college prospects coming into the NFL is at 5 or 6%. The fact he's at 17% stands out drastically. He was heavily involved every single year, and then really peaked here in his last season at Alabama. Had a good season there too. So to me, he is a prospect that you can rely on in your first, even in his rookie year. I think he'll have a role. And the fact that he's a pass catcher as well, a guy you can line up anywhere, makes him such a safe prospect, because we know in fantasy football, targets are more valuable than rush attempts. And so if he gets 7 targets, 6 targets, let's say, and only 10 rush attempts, that's just fine for fantasy football.
Yeah, like the perfect landing spot it wouldn't be out of this world to see if Gibbs gets a perfect landing spot that actually he outproduces Bijan Robinson this year in terms of points scored. Maybe not in terms of how good he is as an NFL player, but those targets, especially those PPR targets, they all add up. So you're just looking for Gibbs to land somewhere good, and for the NFL to, actually use this guy as a pass catcher. I mean, DeAndre Swift, so frustrating to DeAndre Swift because it's not quite getting the work that you'd want, people like that. So yeah, Gibbs, if he gets used correctly, the ceiling is huge for him. So yeah, I quite like shooting for upside on Gibbs there at 4. So who's coming in right after him at 5?
All right, so we're gonna keep it hot here. I'm gonna go Jackson Smith and Jigba. So I think people might be wondering, they're listening, and it's like, where's the quarterback coming in? So that's coming up. But I think Jackson Smith in Jigba is honestly also a safe prospect, but just has that equally high upside, where we saw what his ceiling could be in his second year, where he was, averaged 33% of the team's receiving yards, 3.3 receiving yards per team pass attempt, over 1,600 receiving yards. And so to me, you shouldn't necessarily take too much from his third year, because he was injured, and that truly affected his numbers. But even with the injured year, he, to me, in my wide receiver model, is the 94th percentile, in that 94th percentile range. And that shows how good he is. If you take out that last season, because of injuries, he's like 95th, 96th. He has the upside to be the wide receiver 1 in this class. And I don't think it matters that he's in this, because he's just such good and savvy player that he'll find his way on the field and earn those targets.
Yeah, the more I look into this, and the more like things I watch or listen to or read, the gap between Jackson Smith and Jigba and wide receiver 2 keeps getting bigger for me. I don't know if you're the same, but I just think he's sort of really set himself apart and can just come in right away and be a quarterback's best friend immediately. So absolutely, yeah, I think he's very good value there. I want to find, if you're a team that kind of finished, sort of in the middle there last year, and you've got pick 1-5, and you're getting Jackson Smith and Jigba, that's going to make a big difference to your team. So I think that's a really good pick there. So who's following up at 1-6?
Yeah, so it's another wide receiver here, and it's a guy that I think is closer to Jackson Smith and Jigba than I think is currently being talked about, and that's Jordan Addison. He is, in some ways, somewhat underrated now, because a lot of the attention has been on JSN and Quentin Johnston. But when you look at his profile, he leads this class in receiving yards per game. He's second in college PPR per game. So for those that play, campus to Canton, he probably was a good wide receiver for you. And then when you look at his progression throughout his career, was Involved in his first season at Pittsburgh, 1.8 receiving yards per team pass attempt, 2.9 receiving yards per team pass attempt in his second season. So the threshold in that metric that we want to look at is 2.75. That's like the elite range. If you get above 3, like Jackson Smith and Jigba, that's like through the roof. But yeah, Jordan Addison just missed it at 2.9, still very good. And then he came down slightly in his last season there at USC at 2.3 receiving yards per team pass attempt, but that's still a really good number in context of everyone else. And so he was someone who had an elite sophomore year, was consistent throughout his career. And he is, from what I can tell, locked in first-round pick in the NFL draft. He's invited to the NFL draft. That tells you that very likely he's going to be selected there. And when you think about where he could land too, he probably will not be one of those early picks on teams that have maybe a quarterback question. He might land with the Chargers or the Vikings, which would be a great landing spot. And to me, someone who is not the fastest or most athletic, let's say, but he is very consistent and efficient in his route running. He can get open. I like him a lot, and I think he's a sneaky guy to be one of the more productive wide receivers, if not the most productive wide receiver in this class.
Yeah, Jordan Addison's a guy that I think will just kind of live happily, like in that kind of wide receiver, like higher end, mid end wide receiver 2 territory, like his whole career, maybe even sneaking up into wide receiver 1, depending on, injuries and things like that. But I mean, he looks like a guy that could just play in this league for what, like 10 years, right? And you're getting that in the first round. Like that's great production and great value at 1-6 from a guy like Jordan Addison. So
for sure.
Yeah, I really like the pick. I love him on the Chargers, by the way. That's nice. I like so
I also think we've been a little spoiled with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and Jalen Waddle and all these guys. And you think about the hit rates for guys that produce wide receiver 1 seasons within their first 2 years. I mean, it's not that high.
Yeah.
So, to your point, if he's in the upper end of that wide receiver 2 range for, let's say, the start of his career, I think that's a success at the 106. Just because that will matter for your fantasy football team. It may not be Justin Jefferson levels, but you still need those wide receiver 2s, borderline wide receiver 1s on your team too.
Could be like a Robert Woods kind of guy, right? Obviously, he's towards the tail end of his career, but Robert Woods kind of lived in that kind of zone, right? That's great.
Yeah.
Perfect. So he's in at 6. So who's following up at 7 then?
All right, so we're finally taking that third quarterback. So I'll take Anthony Richardson here.
Yeah.
And I think this is around that range. I wouldn't hate it if a team was desperate at quarterback, decided to take him like 105, 106, because I think the upside is there. Now, of course, the red flags with him is that his passing numbers are literally towards the bottom. And that's the concern, is that he's 25th percentile on adjusted yards per attempt, second percentile on completion rate. So that, even if you adjust that in any way, it's still concerning that he only had a completion rate of 55%. And I understand part of that's team context too, but that does show some risk in his profile. But where the upside is absolutely through the roof is the athletic measurables, right? He's essentially in like 97th, 98th, 99th percentile, anything you look at, like 40 time, 10 yard, 20 yard split, vertical, weight, hand size. I mean, you name it. He's a really, really good athlete, averaged 51 rushing yards per game in his collegiate career. And that's what honestly wins you weeks. If he can put together, let's say one touchdown, 200 yards passing, but then gives you the rushing upside as well, that'll give you an advantage in that high floor. And so if he lands in a great spot, I wouldn't hate taking him earlier. I just think there's a big tier drop between Young and Stroud and then Richardson, just because there's a little bit of risk with what we saw in college.
Yeah, I just love Anthony Richardson. I just love watching him play.
Yeah,
he's a kind of guy I know I'll be sitting in some kind of drafts, and either Bryce Young or CJ Stroud's going to be staring me in the face. And if I've had a few beers, I'm going to take Anthony Richardson. I know it. I could see the drunk drafting ahead of me. I'll just be like, I'll just get carried away with the upside. But I mean, this is a guy that could be, Dynasty 1-1. He really has that kind of like ceiling. But you just don't know what's going to happen. Hopefully, wherever he goes, they will realize that he's not a polished passer, and they will kind of use him in that way. I really like him going to the Colts. Whereas, is it Sheehan Steichen is at the Colts now? Coming over from the Eagles. The offense they ran there with Jalen Hurts, I think Anthony Richardson could slot into that kind of role quite nicely. A lot of running, passing, Hurts really developed as a passer, obviously. But, they also, realized last year he was limited a little bit. So, I like Anthony Richardson. The Colts, who knows where he'll end up, but I think he's a great prospect. And at 1-7, you got to take him in, I think, for sure. So who's following up at 1-8?
Yeah, so here it gets a little interesting because there are some wide receivers here who are still obviously pushing for first round capital, and I think so that's why I'd take Quentin Johnson. It seems his stock has declined a little bit over the last several weeks, right? It seems like that's where they've talked about, like, he's not invited to the NFL draft. It sounds like he could maybe slip into the second round, which is crazy. And that'll obviously affect his dynasty outlook significantly. But what I love about his profile, honestly, is that he never had a season below a 29% receiving yards market share. He was, since day one, very involved, very productive, true freshman breakout. And if he gets first round draft capital, like hypothetically, let's say that's what happens in I'd love him at this pick with that draft capital. He's one of only 4 wide receivers since 2010 to get drafted in the first round, is an early declare wide receiver, and averaged 2 receiving yards per team pass attempt in every single season in his career.
Wow.
The 3 wide receivers that came before him were AJ Green, Amari Cooper, and Rashad Bateman. That's like, there's a whole range of like archetypes for wide receivers, but the fact that he is there among some of the better wide receivers we've seen come in, and he was productive every single year, it puts him in unique company. And so even if he gets early second round capital, I think he'll still be a good prospect. But it's just a little more uncertainty here, where I think JSN and Addison are locked in the first. Johnson, there's a little more wider range of outcomes. So what do you think of Johnson?
I'm pretty convinced he's a guy I'm going to come away with absolutely like no shares of, just because I've got him a lot like lower. I was recently doing on the Fantasy Sanctuary with Rich, Dynasty Island, and Tom Strachan.
Mm-hmm.
He slipped all the way into like 2-4 or something in that draft with us. I think not being invited to the NFL draft, that's a huge like red flag for me. I was like, that's weird. That's kind of interesting. I seen when I was watching his tape, I seen a lot of drops. He had more drops than touchdowns last year, which was never good. And the other, like, I always think just watching him, I'm just like, I feel like he looks like the Hulk, but plays like Bruce Banner. Does that make sense?
That is a really, I love that comparison. That's great. Right? Yeah, it makes sense. So he plays smaller than his size, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'm just like waiting for him to like, because I think with that frame and like the stuff I've seen him do, I'm like, dude, you could be awesome. Yeah. But I'm just like waiting for him to like, maybe is he like too nice or something? I just wanted to like shake him and like rile him up and like come on. So I think there's definitely huge potential there, and I'd love him to go somewhere with really good coaching that could kind of get that out of him. I mean, I know everyone like poo-poos on the Tennessee Titans, but they're coached exceptionally well, so that might not be the worst landing spot for him. But like, I don't know. I wouldn't take him this high, but with so many players like Johnson, and I've never said this more than I have with this draft class, I gotta see where he ends up. Like, there's a lot of players like that where I have to wait and see where will they end up. But he slipped all the way to 2-4, and I think it sort of was becoming a bit of a joke, and we kind of kept rolling with it a little bit, I think. But 2-4 was where he ended up. I don't see him slipping that far. I think it'd be very rare that he leaves the first round in most drafts that you see this year. But you got Johnson locked in, and who's following up then at 1-9?
Got Zach Charbonnet. So nice. I like Zach Charbonnet a lot, and actually just wrote an article about him that came out last week. And the more I dug into his profile, the more I really like who he could be. He honestly has one of the more complete profiles among the running backs here, right? Because he has above average athletic measurables. His 40 time wasn't the greatest, but his 10 and 20 yard splits were really good. He likely will get early day 2 capital from what we've seen in mock drafts. So it's a positive there. And you think about what he did last year. He was one of only 2 Power 5 running backs to average 2.25 yards per team play. So scrimmage yards. We're talking about, rushing and receiving, that combination of that. The 2 running backs were Bijan Robinson and Zach Charbonnet. He was one of the most dominant running backs in college football last year. And we saw that in his 2 years at UCLA. Obviously, the first 2 years at Michigan were a little bit concerning because he didn't, he was played essentially 2 behind Hassan Haskins in his second year. And so that's a little bit of a concern. But the fact that he showed that he can lead a backfield at UCLA with a Chip Kelly offense too, it holds a lot of value for me. And when you put his whole profile together, we talked about like taking everything into account, right? Athleticism, production, and his potential draft capital. The closest comps in my running back model that I have for him are Eddie Lacy, Carlos Hyde, and Zach Moss. So guys that weren't like very dynamic as a receiver, though I think we saw more of that from Zach Charbonnet, but they were consistently productive. And we saw towards the end how productive they could be. And so I think knowing that range of outcomes, I'd take that 100% at this pick, knowing that the upside could be there for like a Lacy, Carlos Hyde, early career. And then Zach Moss might be the floor, but I still like Zach Charbonnet just as an overall prospect. I think he's a great pick in the late first round of Superflex drafts.
Yeah, I really like Zach Charbonnet here as well, especially like the way a lot of the other running backs are built. There's like Bijan Robinson, obviously, but there's not a lot of your Zach Charbonnet type guys in this draft, actually. So I think that's really going to benefit him. And yeah, you're right. We did see a lot more sort of pass catching coming out of him last year. Maybe not the most natural guy doing it, but he can still do it. And he was a weird guy that whenever I started watching tape on these rookies well before like I knew about really anybody that was like the most hyped up people in this class, the three names that stood out to me, one isn't declaring this year, unfortunately, but it was Bijan Robinson, it was Blake Corum, and it was Zach Charbonnet were the three guys that really like popped off the screen for me. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Charbonnet, and I think, yeah, I'd love to see him go up to a good spot, and he might end up in a running back committee, but so are all these guys pretty much, right? So I wouldn't mark him down too much for that. So I love that pick of Charbonnet at 1-9. So who's following up at 110?
Yeah, so I got here Josh Downs, and I think that might be one of the more unpopular picks, or maybe not as common, because there is another guy who I think a lot of people like more, and he'll come here in a pick next. But Josh Downs, I mean, you look at what he did in his career, not as involved in his first season, only 12% of the team's receiving yards, but then in his second season, 40% of the team's receiving yards, 30% in his third year. Leads the class in college PPR points per game, and that's mainly because he was a touchdown machine, accounted for 34% of his team's touchdowns since 2021. And what's also interesting is we talked about that threshold for receiving yards per team pass attempt. Like anything above 3 is really, really good. Downs and JSN are the only Power 5 wide receivers to hit that 3 receiving yards per team pass attempt mark before their third season. And early career production is so key in predicting some of these prospects. That if you're productive early on in your careers, your hit rates at the NFL level, we've seen this with data that it's higher. And so Downs, to me, with second round draft capital, is someone who checks a lot of the boxes. And so I'm happy to get him here. But based on mock drafts that I've seen, rookie mock drafts, he seems to be even lower than that. And I think he'd be a great value early in the second, but I'd be fine taking him as early as, the 110, 111.
Yeah. The argument I keep hearing against Downs is one I don't fully understand. It's, he's was he 5'10" or something? He's like 5'10", like he's not going to be able to get up and get the ball. It's like, but have you seen his vertical? Like, it's insane. Yeah. It's like, do you know who else is 5'10"? Tyreek Hill is 5'10". Nobody's questioning Tyreek Hill's ability to get up and get the ball because he's got an insanely good vertical leap. So does Josh Downs. So I don't get that knock on him so much. I think he is able to get up and win, and we've seen look at his tape. Like he gets up and he wins like in the air like a lot more than you might expect. So I think Downs he's the guy. I think from the start of this whole process a couple of months ago to now, he's the guy I've kind of warmed to the most. So I have seen him like go towards the back end of the first round around here before. So yeah, I don't think you're too crazy taking him here at 110 at all. I really like Josh Downs.
Yeah. And you were talking about Quentin Johnson kind of playing a lot smaller than his frame. I think Josh Downs plays a lot bigger than his frame. Yeah. For sure.
If you just put them together, right? Then you get like the ultimate receiver, right?
Perfect prospect. That's the 101 in this draft class if you combine those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you mentioned you mentioned a receiver. Yeah. He said it's going to come up right now. Is that Zay Flowers? Who is that? Who are we talking about? It
is. Yeah, Zay Flowers is the guy here. And so he's pushing for first round draft capital as well. But I like Josh Downs just a little more. And I think when it comes down, when you think about draft capital and hit rates, I'll probably take Zay Flowers a little earlier than I'd want to in my actual rookie draft. So honestly, Zay Flowers over Josh Downs, I think makes sense in some cases. But, I just like Downs' overall profile a little more. But Flowers in totality is not a bad prospect by any means. Broke out as a true sophomore, averaged 35% of the team's receiving yards in his final 2 years. He's not an early declare, though I don't know if I'd necessarily, put that against him necessarily, because he came back to finish his college degree. There was a lot of talk about him trying to get his, education, right? And that matters a ton. Yeah. And so, and the one thing also with early declares is I try to look at these prospects in the lens of, had they declared last year, let's say like as a junior, would they be a good prospect? And Zay Flowers would be. He wouldn't be an elite prospect, but he'd be good. And so that's where I wouldn't place a big knock on him. He's still like an 85th percentile prospect in my model. I really still like him. And so in this range, you know, Downs and Flowers can be interchangeable. But, you know, Flowers, if he gets drafted as like the second wide receiver in the NFL draft, it's hard to, you know, to push him down this far. But right now, I think there's just a little bit of uncertainty. I don't know if I would buy the hype that he'll be drafted that high, but we'll see here in a couple of days. But overall, I think he's a really solid prospect.
Yeah, I love watching Zay Flowers as well. Just whenever, like, if he gets the ball in his hands and has like even the slightest amount of space, it's real fun to watch. So yeah, I think he's a great talent there at, you know, 111 as well. You're thinking like you're a runner up last year in the league, and you're getting someone like Zay Flowers to add to your team. That's amazing. So who's rounding off the first round then? I picked 112.
You know, I struggle with this pick, but because it's super flex, I think you take Will Levis. The value of a quarterback, I think, just, you know, pushes him up a little bit here. But I'm not as big of a fan, to be honest. I know there are some Will Levis, you know, believers there, and I'd love to hear your thoughts too if you are, if you like him. But I think it's the passing profile is a little risky too, similar to Anthony Richardson, where he's, you know, 33rd percentile adjusted yards per attempt, 64th percentile completion rates is not terrible. Touchdown to interception ratio is 13th percentile, so not the best at, you know, taking care of the ball there. A little concerning in that sense. So it's a risky efficiency profile and passing profile. But unlike Anthony Richardson, who has the athletic measurables and that massive upside to be a, you know, a rushing threat to that level, like a Jalen Hurts, let's say, Will Levis doesn't really have that, in my opinion. And so the question is also, will he get drafted within the first 10 picks of the draft? Could he slide even further? There's just some uncertainty with him. And so I think you take him here if you need a quarterback. But I don't feel great about the pick. I think in some ways I'm like, am I just pushing him up the board because he's a quarterback? But, you know, I think for someone that gets drafted potentially in the first round, I think you just have to take that risk. Someone to, you know, Kenny Pickett too last year kind of slid a little bit, but he's a first round quarterback. I think he went around the 112, 130, you know, 201, 202 as well in some drafts.
Yeah, I mean, pardon the pun here, but I think Will Levis is a potential banana skin, right? That's waiting to like slip some people up here. Yeah, there's too many questions. The thing I hated the most, like for the last, like it's less people saying it now, but I hated seeing the Will Levis is the next Josh Allen. I'm like, get out of here, like just because they look similar, like doesn't mean that they're like a similar kind of like player. Like Josh Allen is twice the prospect that the Will Levis was, in my opinion, anyway. But yeah, I don't see he could be this year sort of Zach Wilson, where people maybe push him up the board a little bit too much and end up, you know, flaming out in 2 years, or you know, he could turn it all around. You never know with these guys, right? It's 50% of these quarterbacks are not going to hit. Any quarterback taken in the first round, there's like a 50-50 hit ratio on them. So you never know what's going to happen. Will Levis could surprise some people. But for me personally, he is a lot closer to Hendon Hooker than he is to Anthony Richardson and these other guys.
Agreed. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So he's still running up the first round, though. Like quarterback at pick 12, still pretty good. So who's starting off round number 2 for you then, Marvin?
All right. So I know it's not a tight end premium, but I would take Michael Mayer here because the positional scarcity with tight ends, there's a lot of open room for a new tight end 1 to enter the fold here for fantasy football. And I think Michael Mayer could do it. You know, I think with tight ends, we have to always set that expectation of most of them don't hit in their first season. Most of them hit in their second or third. Like that's what we've just seen for fantasy football. When I'm thinking about tight end 1 seasons as the hit rate, but Kyle Pitts kind of, once again, kind of like Jamar Chase, Kyle Pitts spoiled us a little bit with getting that 1,000 yards and setting, you know, having a good rookie year. I mean, now last year was a little bit rough, but he was still, you know, that's not the norm, where usually they struggle in their first season, second season they produce. But if I had to bank on a guy to produce in the first season, it'd be Michael Mayer, someone who has one of the best production profiles we've seen from a tight end in a long, long time, better even than Kyle Pitts. He has a true freshman breakout, averaged 33% of Notre Dame's receiving yards in his final season. And that's ridiculous to think about because most tight ends don't average that many receiving yards in their collegiate career at any point. And that's like wide receiver, like top tier wide receiver one production, or top tier wide receiver production, I should say, for a prospect. And so the fact that Michael Mayer can do that shows that he's a versatile receiver. I know he was kind of overshadowed with his 40 time and his athletic numbers because there were so many guys that ran like 4.5, 4.6 at the combine, but 470 is still a good number. His speed score, when you adjust for his height and weight, is in the 73rd percentile according to Player Profiler, so that's still pretty good. And so when I factor all of that in, he to me is like a 96, 97th percentile prospect in my tight end model. That's the best prospect since Kyle Pitts. The hit rates for those guys are really, really high. And they generally produce at least one tight end one season, if not two, in their first 3 years in the league. So I'm very high on Michael Mayer. I think he'll have a good career. But, you know, I don't know if I'd take him over some of these other wide receivers, but in the early second, I'm down taking him because he could be a difference maker for your team.
Michael Mayer is an interesting one, right? He's almost like so good he's become like boring and like uninteresting to take.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, it's
prospect
very
fatigue.
Yeah, kind of like that. Like I think Michael Mayer is the best tight end in this class in terms of what he can do for an NFL team. I love me some Dalton Kincaid. I think maybe he's got potentially higher, you know, ceiling in terms of, you know, especially if you're doing like PPR and points, but he could also flame out and become nothing. I don't think there's any chance Michael Mayer is going to flame out and become nothing. I think he's here to stay. He's definitely a safe pick at tight end. And, you know, hopefully he can kind of be the next guy to break through that glass ceiling. Sort of like, I mean, maybe Dallas Goedert was the last guy to do that. He's kind of broken away from the pack a little bit. I would say Kyle Pitts, but he kind of came in ahead of the game, right? He didn't really break away. He was always at the top. So, you'd be hoping he could be like a Dallas Goedert that kind of separates himself from the pack a little bit. And he's definitely talented enough to do that. That's for sure. So I love Michael Mayer there at 2-1. Who's following up at 2-2?
All right. So we got Devon Achane, smaller running back, 188 pounds, 190 pounds. And that's why I think to me he's a tough player to evaluate because there aren't many comps for him. Guys that are that light, but were in some ways just as productive. He averaged over 100 scrimmage yards per game in his career. Ridiculous for someone his size that he was able to do that. Final season averaged over 2 yards per team play. Led Texas A&M's backfield, despite his size. So that was the concern, is he was always splitting time with Isaiah Spiller in his first 2 years. Then he became the guy in his third year. And, we don't usually see running backs with his size drafted on day 2, right? There aren't many. Yeah. Most of them are day 3 guys. But the fact that he's consistently projected as a day 2 pick tells you what the NFL believes and thinks of him. If he gets that draft capital, it's hard to not take him here in the early second. I get there's size concerns, and that's why I have Zach Charbonnet. I'd rather have Zach Charbonnet than Devon Achane, but the upside is through the roof because he has that game-breaking athleticism, and he was very productive in college as well.
Yeah, he's the kind of guy you just really want him to go to like a creative mind. Like you imagine like Devon Achane, like with Andy Reid calling plays for him or something like that. Like that would just be awesome to see. Like just get this guy a couple of touches a game and see what he can do and draw him up some cool ideas. I think he's so fast and so underrated as like how strong he is as well. Actually, he's not like horrible in between the tackles by any means at all. I think whereas other prospects later on, maybe like a Sean Tucker or someone is just kind of more reliant on his speed. Devon Achane is actually, he's happy enough to go and hit some people in the mouth as well, which I really like about him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, so he's locked in at pick 2-2. Who's following up at pick 2-3?
All right, so I would take Jalen Hyatt here. I think he's not my favorite prospect. Let's preface it by this. After Zay Flowers, I think there's a significant tier drop after the next couple of guys, in my opinion. And Jalen Hyatt kind of leads that group because his draft capital is potentially in that, late first, maybe early second. We saw the upside with him in his final season. The I talked about that threshold again, 3 receiving yards per team pass attempt. That's really good. He hit that in his junior season, over 30% of the team's receiving yards. But a lot, some people talk about, was that a result of scheme? A lot of his touchdowns were just him like breaking wide open into the open space because he's really that fast. And I think that's part of his game. And I think the concern here is that could limit what he can do in the NFL. That's maybe how some teams will just use him as like, go route guy, get open, let's throw the ball, a couple times. And he's not that target hog. But if he gets the draft capital, it's hard to not consider him here because of the efficiency that he provides, the athleticism, and you just have to understand like there is a wide range of outcomes with guys here in the second round. And I think Jalen Hyatt kind of, exemplifies that. There's a wider range of outcomes where he could be a good prospect, very productive, but then he may also just flame out because of some of the red flags we saw in his collegiate career. But, still, if he's in the second round and with what he showed us in his final year, it's hard not to take him in this range.
Yeah, I can't figure him out, man. He's just like, you're right, there are like a couple of red flags, but then I'm also like, I scored like 5 touchdowns against Alabama. Like you don't do that and just be like a regular kind of guy. Like that doesn't happen. So it's like, what's going on? You mentioned Jordan Addison to the Chargers earlier. The Chargers have been looking for this kind of downfield go route guy for a while. They obviously don't really want to they want to get Mike Williams more involved than that. They've got like people like Jalen Guyton at the minute. I think Jalen Hyatt would be real nice on the Chargers with Justin Herbert throwing the ball. If he lands somewhere like that, then I'm real interested in Jalen Hyatt, especially, I picked 2-3. So yeah, I really like that there. Who's following up at pick 2-4?
All right, so we got another tight end here. So I'll take Dalton Kincaid. We talked about him already a little bit, but I think he is kind of in that that second tier of tight ends. I think Michael Mayers kind of stands out as the guy. But then Dalton Kincaid, he, for me, is just a really solid receiver. We saw a progression in his career. I know he started his career at San Diego, but he dominated there too. I know it's an FCS conference, but the fact that you dominate at that level is still good to see. And then he transferred to Utah and averaged over 23% of the team's receiving yards in years 4 and 5. And 23 might not seem much when we're talking about, Michael Mayer averaging over 30%, but if you're in the 20 to 25% range, that's really good for a tight end because, like I said, most of them aren't as involved as receivers. And so Dalton Kincaid showed us the receiving upside. When you watch his film, he is a solid route runner, a guy who can get open in multiple ways. And that's why, to me, when you factor in the potential first-round capital, we see tight ends have a really high hit rate if they're drafted in the first round. Maybe not in their first season, but year 2, year 3. And so if you need a tight end, and we have some of these older tight ends kind of potentially leaving the league soon or maybe declining, Dalton Kincaid, Michael Mayer, these are the guys I'm looking for because I think they could be the next group of guys that could break into that, top 10, maybe even top 5 in the Dynasty landscape.
Yeah, this is such a good tight end class, isn't it? Like there's
for sure
not just these two guys, but there's more who, might get mentioned later on in the second round, but there's loads of guys even in the third as well that you can definitely scoop up to. So Dalton Kincaid, love the pick there. So who's following up at 2-5?
All right, so we got Marvin Mims here. I know he's a little further down the ADP on Sleeper, but I like him in the second round.
Me too.
You think about the boxes you want to see a wide receiver check. The early declare, whether there are some exceptions there, but early declares generally hit at a higher rate. The consistent progression in his career peaked in his third season at 33% of the team's receiving yards, 19.5 yards per reception. So a massive big play guy. And the after the catch ability is honestly so intriguing with Marvin Mims. It's just a really solid player, smart player in that sense. And so he's probably going to be like borderline second, third round capital in the NFL draft. But man, he checks so many boxes. So I love him here as someone who, could be an impactful guy, maybe not a wide receiver 2 in his first season, but maybe wide receiver 3 and a flex consideration.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot. Exactly kind of what I thought as well. It's a guy that I think will have, pretty decent first year, and hopefully you'll see that target share increase the more he gets his hands on the ball, the more he kind of develops. And you got to remember about these guys as well. Like they're they're not like fully grown men yet, right? Like Marvin
21,
Mims
right? 20. It's crazy.
yeah, like so he's got a lot of like the knock on like some of these guys is they're too small, they're too light. I mean, you go look at like what Cooper Kupp looked like in his sort of combine and what he looks like now. It's like a different human being. He's like an absolute gorilla now. Whereas at the combine, he was like this kind of skinnier kid. So yeah, these guys have time to develop and grow into their body. So I think the undersized thing, while I get it, I'm like, you can fix that. And Marvin Mims has got a lot of things that you can't teach, and he's got a lot of things that you can't fix. So I'm really pleased with Marvin Mims in the second round there. So who's up at 2-6?
All right, so here we got another quarterback. So I would take Hendon Hooker here.
Yeah.
And you kind of talked a little bit about how he's much closer to Will Levis than we like to think. And I think if he didn't get injured, he'd be considered in the first round, or should be. I know he's a fifth-year guy, and so there's that concern that he's kind of peaked, and that's why he dominated, because he's an older prospect. But I mean, he tore his ACL last year, but even then, in his career, he's a 79th percentile completion rate passer, 95th percentile adjusted yards per attempt, 93rd percentile touchdown to interception ratio. Just a really solid passing profile, and also sneakily good, as a rusher, 46 rushing yards per game. I mean, that's pretty solid there. Now, of course, the torn ACL is a concern, because will he be as athletic after that? But we've seen quarterbacks actually bounce back from that injury. And so I think he could be a value for whichever team decides to take a gamble on him. Maybe it's the second round. But because of that second round draft capital, he probably doesn't warrant that first round, ADP, but still a solid pick here, in my opinion. He has that solid blend of just athletic ability and passing efficiency. So I like him here. I think the upside could be there if he's healthy in the NFL.
Yeah, this is a guy who's probably going to, win the Heisman Trophy if he didn't get injured as well. Like he was odds-on favorite to do that. So yeah, I think he would have been ahead of Will Levis probably in a draft here. And I mean, torn ACLs, they're like a dime a dozen in the NFL these days anyway. Like it's not what it used to be, right? It's not this kind of death sentence anymore. The medicine and the surgeries they have is, second to none. So I'm less concerned about that ACL than I would have been even like 5 years ago. That would have been a lot more troublesome. But I think, with the facilities these teams have now, that shouldn't be too bad in Hendon Hooker. It will probably affect his draft capital low, but that might just mean he ends up in a better situation. So we'll have to see what happens with Hendon Hooker. And we're into sort of the second half of the second round then at pick 2-7. Who's coming up next?
Yeah, so this would go to Tajay Spears. And
nice.
It might be a little bit of a, I think, lower than most people would expect him to go. But what's interesting with him, when you look at mock drafts and like the trends, he's slowly improved his stock throughout the draft process. And his profile is solid when you think about him never having a season below 15% of the team's total yards, so scrimmage yards, involved every single year. Had a solid breakout season in year 4, 29.7% of the team's total yards, 1.95 scrimmage yards per team play. So very involved and efficient there. He leads the class also in yards per touch. So there's that efficiency that you like to see from a running back. But he is smaller at around 200 pounds. So when you compare him to a guy like Gibbs, who's in that range, Gibbs just offers a little more versatility, produced at a slightly higher level earlier in his career. And that's why he's probably going to be taken, around before Spears. But if Spears gets that third round draft capital, I think this is a solid place to take him. We'll see. You've talked about some of these later guys. Landing spot will matter, and I think it will for Spears. But day 2 capital on running backs, they do have a solid hit rate too. So I'm fine taking him here in the mid second.
Yeah, I really, really like Tajay Spears. You might not like this so much, Marvin, but he was a guy who was on the clock at 2-3, and I had Quentin Johnson or Tajay Spears to choose. So I was like, screw it, I'm going to take Tajay Spears. But my big thing, he's obviously not known for being this pass catching back, right? He isn't. He doesn't really have that so much. But I'm convinced that he can do it. Yeah. I'm like, if Leonard Fournette can do it, Tajay Spears can do it. I'm like 100% sure, because he's so electric with the ball in his hands. I would just love to see him just add that extra little pass catching wrinkle. He can do it, obviously, but just get a bit more involved with that. And depending on where he goes and what scheme they run, that could be really, unlocking another level for Tajay Spears. So I think, he's really good value there at pick 7 in the second round. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 picks left. Who's coming in at the 5th last pick?
Yeah, let's close this out. So I have Nathaniel Tank Dell. I know his sleeper ADP is like way down there.
Yeah,
gonna have to scroll.
There he is.
There he is. Not that far down, but
no.
This is maybe the more, I guess maybe this is the hottest take that I might have. I don't know if people like him as much as I do, but I've seen him mocked consistently with day 2 capital, and so that means, even with his size concerns, the fact that the NFL is willing to take him there means a lot. He transferred a couple times in his career early on, but no matter where he played, he dominated at one point in that time of his career. He averaged 44% of the team's receiving yards in his second season. Now, this was, FCS, if I remember right. So it's not, like Power 5 conference or anything, but still impressive that he was able to do that. And then he transferred to Houston, was immediately involved, 20% receiving yards market share in his, I guess it would be his 3rd year out of high school. And then in his final 2 years, so he is a 5th-year prospect, he did average 34%. And so that is still good to see. Those are really good numbers to be that involved. Over 2,700 receiving yards and 29 touchdowns since 2021. A small guy, but the guy, he can get open. And when you get open, size may not matter because you have that much of a separation in the open field. And so, yes, he's a smaller wide receiver, but he honestly, some people say he's one of the best route runners in this class. And so I think there's a massive value that you can have with him because I don't think you need to reach this far to get him. This is where I would be comfortable taking him, but you can get him in the 3rd. And for someone with day 2 capital, if he truly gets that, I think he'd be a great pick.
Yeah, he's just so much fun to watch, isn't he? Like it's also because he's like so small as well. It kind of adds to it. You're like, look at this little guy go. Like it's my only like concern with him is obviously you see him like running away from the people he's playing against in college, but what does he do if he like, what if Micah Parsons hits him, man? That's like, that's real because he's not running away from Micah Parsons either. And like, I know he's a freak, obviously, but that's my real issue with him is what happens whenever the guys in the NFL, these freaks, get their hands on him. I think he had a few fumble issues in college. I don't have the stats in front of me. That's my only real issue with him. But again, you just hope wherever he goes, he gets schemed in the right way where you're not running it into these giants and you're finding holes for him to work in, because if he gets space, he's really, really dangerous. So I like the back. I think Tom Strachan took him exactly the same spot here. So you're in good company there. So who's following Tank Dell at 2-9?
All right, so I think we're kind of getting to the point here where it's a bunch of potential day 3 guys. This is usually the range where they get selected, and so we'll talk about like pieces of advice, right, to dynasty players. I think when you're drafting guys that have day 3 capital, first of all, go after guys that were day 2 picks first. But day 3 guys, we see hit rates improve for fantasy football when you isolate it on declare status and then guys who produced highly and early in their careers. We see that for wide receivers, specifically for running backs as well. And so the next guy I'll take is Sean Tucker, because I know he's kind of in that, is he going to be a day 3 pick? He has this pro day here coming up on Monday, a few days before the NFL Combine. So it'll be interesting to see if he crushes that. And everyone mocked him for his tape that he posted and everything. And he fudged those numbers, but we'll see here the official numbers hopefully in a couple days. But he to me profiles as a really, really good running back if he gets the draft capital, because of just what he did even as a true freshman. Almost 30% of the team's total yards as a true freshman, 38% of the team's total yards as a sophomore, and then also 13% of their team's receiving yards. So he has that receiving ability as well. And then it came down a little bit as a junior, as a whole for that team as well. I think they weren't as productive, but 30% of the team's yards market share. So, I mean, the fact that he came down slightly in his junior year shouldn't be as big of a knock because of how productive he still was. And So he honestly profiles as a guy who could rank in that, Zach Charbonnet range if he gets day 2 capital. But because of the uncertainty, I think he slipped in ADP. But if you can get him here at 210, this is 209, I should say. He'd be a great pick because the upside is through the roof. Someone who, like I said, you find the early declares, the productive guys in day 3, and they just have a higher hit rate for fantasy.
Yeah, Sean Tucker's got so many like tick marks next to him, right? He's so fast. He's really like good, like getting to that edge and getting to the outside. I think maybe like a couple of weeks ago, maybe like 2 months ago, you seen him kind of go back into the first round. That was way too rich for my money. But around here, I really like the value you can get from Sean Tucker around this kind of area here. So I'm really pleased with that well pick there, Marvin. You got 3 left to go. So who's going to be your third last pick?
We'll take Dwayne McBride here. Another guy who I think is a little more under the radar. Another guy you gotta like scroll down to get to him. But like I said, find those early declares, the guys that were productive. Similar to Sean Tucker, that's who Dwayne McBride is. He also has a 215-pound frame. So we talked about a lot of those smaller running backs in this class.
Yep.
This guy's a little bigger too. He's got some size to him. And when you look at his progression, he had, so just talking about like team yards market share, 18% in his first year, 28% in his second year, and then 36% in his third year. Averaged over 2, I think he was like around 2 yards per team play, if I remember right, in his third year as well. Just really productive. And the progression that you want to see from a running back prospect was there. Now, capital is the only issue, and whether teams actually value what he brings to the fold will matter a ton, and landing spot too. But if you're going after guys that were very productive in college, early declares, I think Dwayne McBride needs to belong in that range. Again, another guy you don't have to reach for, but I'd be comfortable taking him this high.
Yeah, someone asked me a while ago, like, who do you see this year's Isaiah Pacheco being? And Dwayne McBride was my answer for that. Like a guy that, maybe not a lot of people know about, might kind of slip under the radar, but whenever you actually see him play, you go like, oh, I like this. Like, I like this guy. Like, so Dwayne McBride's a guy you should have on your radar if you don't already. So who's coming in as your penultimate pick then of this draft?
All right, so we got Zach Evans, guy who's fallen so much over the last year, which is crazy because and context here, right? Context matters. And Zach Evans played behind one of the best true freshman running backs we've seen in a while. And so you need to factor that in as well when he played at Ole Miss. And so when you look at his total profile, though, there was that upside as well that we saw in his time at TCU when he was the guy. He averaged over 2 yards per team play at TCU. Anything above 2 is really good, right? That's what Zach Charbonnet did last year. That's what Bijan Robinson did in his second season as well. And Zach Evans did that in his second season. But then he transferred to Ole Miss, and then there was a little bit of like usage issues there, and he played behind Quinshon Judkins, and so there are all these things that we're wondering, like, why did he lose that opportunity? Why wasn't he the guy as the junior heading into that team? And so, of course, it fell, like his draft capital fell, and there are concerns there. But he's still one of the most efficient running backs in this class. So as a day 3 guy who was an early declare, showed some upside, I'm fine taking him this late. Where think about where his ADP was maybe 6 months ago, he was probably like first round pick in rookie drafts, maybe even higher. If you can get him here, I think the upside is there if he lands on a good.
Yeah, very similar to Sean Tucker here. He was a guy, like I started like doing videos a couple of months ago of like I took lots of mock drafts from all around like the industry and like did an ADP and you had Zach Evans right up there with Zach Charbonnet, and I was just like, this is not on. This cannot can't have this. But around here, I'm like, okay, like Zach Evans, I kind of have him around the same kind of area as like Kendra Miller's and people like that. Where
Mhm.
because Kendra Miller was at TCU with him, right? And was that part of the reason why Zach Evans transferred to get away from Kendra Miller, or do you know that? I'm not 100% sure of the story behind it.
Yeah, I'm sure that was part of it too. I think he also just wanted to be in a bigger program, and Ole Miss kind of just provided that for him. But ironically, he was relegated to RB2, so it just happens. And
TCU went to the finals,
Yeah, exactly. But that's that's the thing too, is that's why I said context matters, because he might be playing. He could have played behind the guy in 2025 who will be like the RB2 of that rookie class potentially, and so got to remember that too, right? And so not to dismiss entirely what the decline that we saw from him, but we saw the upside. And so like you said, late second round pick, you go with upside here with a bunch of day 3 guys. I mean, just go with a guy that at least showed us something in college.
Yeah, absolutely. So who's the final guy here then that showed you something in college, and who you taking to round off the draft?
Yeah, so this one was tough because I think there are a couple of guys who are kind of like in that could get day 2 capital still, but most likely day 3. There are tight ends that I really like here. Darnell Washington, Sam Laporta. My gut tells me to take a tight end, but I would probably just take Tank Bigsby here right now because of, once again, guys who were consistently productive, early declare, probably a day 3 pick from what we've seen. He slipped a lot as well when he was consistently mocked as a day 2 guy. But the guy was just consistently productive every single year. I mean, never fell below 23% of the team's total yards, peaked at 25.3. So he never had that elite season. His best season was junior year, but even then that wasn't necessarily elite. But he is still a 74th percentile speed score athlete with a 210-pound frame. There, I could see him kind of like a Damian Harris, who kind of the in between the tackles guy, first and second down. If he's getting mocked and in this range, he probably won't be a 3-down back. But still, I think there's a role for him in the NFL. And considering that running backs are scarce and finding some of those guys for your dynasty teams matter, I think that's why I'd take a running back here over one of the tight ends. But just to preface this, I'd be fine taking a tight end in any of one of these late second round picks, because guys like Washington, Laporta, they're all good picks as well here.
Yeah, I love it. And you can kind of see, even just looking at the board here, the amount of running backs in this class. This is what we were sold, right? Years ago, like the running backs coming through. People weren't lying. Look at all that green on that board. There is a lot of running back talent to go around, and even more into the 3rd and 4th rounds. There's just loads of these guys, which is great. And Tank Bigsby and Zach Evans, again, we're going to see where they end up, and that will kind of shift what order that they go in. But Marvin, that brings us to the end of our 2023 rookie mock draft. But just before we end it here, is there any guy who's like a sleeper, or like somebody who's like you're not going to take in the 2nd round, but you're like, you know what, keep an eye out for this guy in like your 3rd and 4th rounds? Anyone coming to mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to think like which guys do I like. I mean, we talked about the tight ends. I mean, I think it's got to be a tight end here. I mean, it's so unpopular because tight ends, struggle to produce, but I really like Sam Laporta, who I don't think you need to take in the 2nd round. And even like in a tight end premium league, I don't think he'll be drafted that highly either. You could get him in the early 3rd, mid 3rd, honestly, but the guy was just so productive. I mean, Iowa, you talk about like tight end that's Iowa, right? They have a bunch of good tight ends coming out and entering the NFL and producing. But Laporta is one of the guys, like unlike a George Kittle who didn't check like the production box for various reasons. Laporta did, and he was involved every single year, and for most of his career. And we saw the peak of his production here in his 4th year here last year in 2022. Probably going to get day 2 capital. Those guys generally hit at the NFL level, and he's a solid receiving running back as well that gives teams like also the blocking. I mean, he will be a solid NFL tight end for teams, and I think that'll translate to receiving production as well. So I really like him, honestly, but I don't think you need to take him here in the 2nd round. Same can be said again, like about Dwayne McBride and even like Tank Dell. Those guys you don't have to reach for here, but I think those are the guys I think about that have the upside to be productive in the NFL in the right system and team.
Absolutely love it. And yeah, that then definitely brings us to the end. Marvin, thank you so much for coming on, giving us some hints and tips and chatting through 2023 rookie mock draft. And thanks everyone for listening. Hey, if you made it this far, come on, you definitely have to hit that subscribe button, right? And if you're listening, if you're on the back of a bus, on a train, or in your car, or wherever, maybe leave that little 5-star review on whatever you're listening to, Spotify, Apple Music, who knows. Let's see how many we can get. That'd be awesome. So, Marvin, mate, absolute pleasure once again. Do you want to remind everybody where they can find you online and what you're up to before you go?
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This was super fun. Anyone can find me on Twitter. That's where I post most of my stuff. It's at @FF_MarvinE. Most of my work gets on there. I have another rookie profile coming out here right before the draft. Jonathan Mingo. So that's the last one I'll have pre-draft, and we'll have some, rookie and dynasty content coming out on the fantasy footballers over the next, several months and leading into redraft season, which is crazy. That's right around the corner. But thank you for having me. This was super fun.
Awesome. Thanks again. And thanks everybody for listening. Remember, for anything dynasty you need to know, keep it locked on the Certified Inferno. Stay lit. See ya.